Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Brianna Carter, and for most of my adult life, my story looked polished from the outside. At 41, I had earned tenure as a professor in business administration at Howard University in Washington, District of Columbia, the youngest Black woman in my department. My husband, Terrence, was a partner at a respected law firm downtown. After 16 years together, 15 married, our days moved to a steady rhythm that friends praised as aspirational. Our summers meant barbecues in our backyard in Northeast Washington, District of Columbia. We took long walks with our rescue dog through tree-lined streets. Quiet Sunday mornings were spent at Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church, a sanctuary of hymns and sunlight on stained glass. In winter, we flew to visit family in Atlanta and returned home with suitcases full of leftovers and stories. At dinner parties, people grinned at how often we finished each other's sentences and how naturally we backed each other up. I wanted to believe in that image more than I believed in what sometimes whispered behind closed doors. There were small fissures beneath the smooth surface. Terrence's hugs shortened. His laugh cooled. His late nights at the office stacked up like unanswered questions. I told myself it was the grind of big cases, the cost of city life, the pressure of trying to build generational wealth. I called it a season. I called it normal. I told myself love was work, and we were working. On a Thursday night, the quiet of our bedroom broke in a way I could never unhear. Terrence was in the shower, his low baritone humming under the beat of water striking tile. I sat cross-legged on our bed, grading midterm papers, red pen uncapped, mind half on rubrics and half on a lingering sense that something was off. His phone buzzed where it sat on the dresser. The screen lit up. For years, I never once checked his messages. Trust was sacred, the foundation we had promised to protect. But a cold weight slid along my spine as I glanced over. A preview flashed. Table for two at the Monarch confirmed. Friday, 8 o'clock in the evening. Window. As you like. She always loves that view. My heart snagged on the word always, as if the sentence had been waiting for me to read it. The Monarch was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place with a weeks-long wait list and a view that made social media glow. Terrence and I had said we would go for an anniversary, then put it off because work, because timing, because life. We had never walked through its doors together. Now, apparently, someone else had become his always. I told myself not to look further, but my hands were quicker than my caution. The phone was still open from his music playlist. I scrolled past group messages and work emails until a thread stopped me cold. A year's worth of messages, photos, and little hearts between Terrence and a woman named Ayanna Ellis. I recognized her name. She was a public relations manager at Terrence's firm, the one who wore bold colors and hoop earrings and laughed big at company picnics. I had shaken her hand, smiled at her across crowded offices, and made small talk about traffic. Photos slid across the screen. Terrence and Ayanna in matching t-shirts at a Washington Nationals game. Rum punch on a rooftop in Anacostia. Their heads tilted close against a sunset sky. The two of them standing too near each other on the steps of the Supreme Court, faces softened in a shared joke. Words followed. Missed you last night. That blue dress will be in my head all day. Counting the hours. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. The shower turned off. Steam curled from the doorway. Terrence stepped out with a towel at his waist, hair damp, a line of water running down his chest. You see my black tie? He asked, voice casual, eyes scanning the room. Top drawer, I said. My voice sounded flat and unfamiliar. He smiled distractedly, pulled the tie free, and kissed my cheek as if the world had not shifted under our feet. That night, I lay beside him pretending to scroll my own phone. My body was rigid as a beam, my mind replaying every message, every photo, every little heart. How many times had I blamed distance on stress? How often had I silenced my instincts because I wanted to be the reasonable wife who trusted her husband? It felt as if our memories were dissolving in acid, and I could not stop the reaction. At sunrise, I cooked Terrence's favorite breakfast, avocado toast, turkey bacon, strong coffee. I watched his face as I handed him the plate, searching for any crack of guilt. Big presentation today? I asked in a tone so even it felt borrowed. Yes. New client, he said, glancing at his watch. He kissed my cheek again and left, the door clicking softly shut behind him. As soon as he was gone, I called the university's human resources office. I asked for 3 days. Family emergency, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that cooled in my hands and grew heavy as a stone. 16 years, the way time settles into a house, into clothing, into the sound a person makes when they breathe and sleep, pressed down on me until my shoulders hurt. I did not know what I wanted. Revenge answers closure. I only knew I could not swallow this and pretend it was a lump that would dissolve. If Terrence had planned a date with Ayanna at the Monarch, then they would have company. I opened my laptop and typed her name. Ayanna's LinkedIn profile was immaculate. She was poised and polished, a member of Delta Sigma Theta, a self-proclaimed proud dog mother, a speaker at networking breakfasts. I clicked further. An Instagram tag revealed her partner. Calvin Ellis, a software architect with a broad smile that reached his eyes. There was a 5-year wedding anniversary post with roses and well wishes from family. I stared at the photo of Calvin and Ayanna on a beach, a banner overhead, their faces trusting. I tried to imagine the shock he would feel if he knew. The thought made my stomach clench. I did not know how to tell him without detonating his life in a single phone call. But I am good at invitations. That afternoon, I sent him an email using my university credentials, professional and restrained. Mr. Ellis, my name is Dr. Brianna Carter from Howard University. We are planning a public discussion on Black excellence in technology and entrepreneurship, and your work caught my attention. Would you consider meeting to discuss a possible collaboration? I have reserved a table at the Monarch for Friday at 8 o'clock in the evening for a private conversation. Please let me know if you are available. I hit send and stared at the cursor. Minutes stretched long. At 6 o'clock, he replied, Dr. Carter, thank you for the invitation. It would be an honor to join you. Friday at 8 works. Best, Calvin. My pulse thudded in my throat as I read his message. The next call I made was to the Monarch. Good evening, I said. This is Brianna Carter. I would like a table for 2 by the window, please. If possible, near the Hamilton party. Yes, Terrence Hamilton. We are partners on a community project and would like to celebrate close by. The hostess paused, then said, Noted. We will seat you nearby. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. The first steps had been taken. Friday arrived humid and bright, the city alive with weekend energy that seemed to hum at the edges of every block. Outside, cars rolled past with bass lines thumping, and a warm breeze moved through the maples. I showered and reached for a deep emerald dress I had not worn in years, bold and unapologetic, a color Terrence had once said was a little loud for dinner. I pulled my braids into a knot and slid in the gold hoop earrings my grandmother had given me when I graduated, their weight a memory against my neck. When I entered the Monarch, the maitre d' smiled as if I was expected. Dr. Carter, welcome, she said, leading me to the window with a view of the city's lights tracing avenues and rooftops in a complicated grid. I ordered a bourbon neat to steady my hands. I watched the reflections in the glass. Couples leaning close, waiters moving like practiced dancers, a soft glitter of silverware and glass. Calvin arrived just after 8, tall and broad-shouldered, his suit pressed, his tie clean and understated. His smile was polite but uncertain. Dr. Carter? He asked. Calvin, I said, standing to shake his hand. Thank you for coming. We sat, and I asked about his work. He spoke with pride about mentoring Black youth in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, about building teams where interns were not invisible, about writing clean code and remembering that software touches lives. I listened and nodded, but my gaze kept angled toward the entrance. At 8:17, Terrence and Ayanna walked in laughing, their step in an easy rhythm I recognized from our early years. Terrence wore the gray suit I bought him for his 40th birthday. Ayanna's dress caught the candlelight and shimmered like water. The host led them to a booth in my line of sight. They sat with knees touching. The ease of their intimacy turned in my gut like a key in a lock. Calvin noticed my focus stray. Is everything all right? He asked gently. He had the kind of face that softened when he asked a question twice. Just a long week. I said it first, then I set down my fork because evasion felt wrong. Calvin, I said, I did not invite you here to talk about technology. He waited, eyebrows raised, patient. Your wife is here with my husband, I said. The words were heavy but solid, true in a way that made them oddly steady in my mouth. They are here on a date. For a heartbeat, he did not move. Ayanna, he repeated quietly, as if the name had to travel a distance to reach him. He turned slowly and saw them. Terrence's head was tipped toward Ayanna, their shoulders slanting in. The soft glow of the lanterns made everything look gentler than it was. Calvin's jaw tightened. His hands trembled where they rested on the tablecloth. "I never thought she would," he said, voice low and stunned. He looked back at me with eyes that mirrored the feeling inside my chest, an astonishment so painful it felt like a bruise. We sat without speaking for a full minute while the room carried on around us. A couple to our left laughed. A waiter refolded a napkin and set it beside a new glass of water. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "Expose them?" The question hung between us, heavy with possibility and danger. "No scenes," I said. "I just want them to know that we know. That is all." I did not want to be a story anyone else told. I wanted clarity, not spectacle. Calvin nodded once, as if the simplicity of that plan offered him something to hold. We finished our entrees in a shared quiet that was not awkward so much as concentrated, like the quiet before a meeting starts or a verdict is read. When dessert arrived, we stood together. Our legs worked like we were moving through water. We walked to their table. Their laughter thinned as we approached. Terrence looked up, confusion flickering into dread in a span so short I could see it happen. "Bree," he said, my name heavy in his mouth. Ayana's eyes widened. Her lips parted, then closed again. The moment stretched. I leaned down, my voice low and even. "Enjoying dinner, Terrence?" His hand tightened around his fork. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I did not bother to answer. I turned to Ayana. "It is lovely to finally meet you in person," I said. "I hear you love the view from this window." Ayana swallowed. Her gaze flicked to Calvin. "Please," she said, reaching out, but he shook his head. "Not here, Ayana," he said. "Not now." His voice carried a sadness so deep it pressed at my own ribs. For a long breath, the four of us were a still life in amber light, the kind of tableau you remember for its silence more than its words. I set a folded napkin on their table, as if I were placing a full stop at the end of a long sentence. "You both should talk," I said, voice steady enough to surprise me. "We are finished here." Calvin and I turned away and walked out into the night. The air outside was warm and damp. U Street's lights blurred at the edges as my eyes adjusted. We stood together on the curb, breathing as if we had both just run hard. "Thank you for telling me," Calvin said after a moment. "I would rather know the ugly truth than live in the dark." I nodded. "Me too." We exchanged numbers with the pragmatic care of people who had been pushed into the same boat by an unexpected current. At home, Terrence was waiting. The lamps were low. His tie hung undone around his neck. He started speaking the moment I stepped inside. "Bree, let me explain. Please." His voice cracked on the last word. "How long?" I asked, my own voice almost a whisper. He swallowed. 7 months, he said. But it did not mean anything. I laughed once, a short, sharp sound that hurt my throat. "It did not mean anything," I repeated. "You risked everything for nothing." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "I need space," I said, and the words dropped like stones into water. I packed a duffel bag with clothes in quick, practical movements. I drove to my sister Lauren's house in Silver Spring, Maryland, and let myself in with the spare key she insisted I keep. The next week passed in a blur of sleepless nights and whispered phone calls. Terrence sent flowers that made the living room smell like a greenhouse, long emails full of apologies, and promises he could not articulate beyond the word change. Ayana left Terrence dozens of voicemails that I did not listen to. I let silence sit where conversation might once have been. Calvin texted once, "She moved out this morning." I still cannot believe it. I stared at the words for a while and then wrote back, "Neither can I." It was strange, the way a stranger could feel like the only person who understood the landscape I was walking across. At night, I lay on Lauren's couch and watched shadows move across the ceiling. I thought of the earliest version of Terrence and me, two graduate students in love with ideas and with each other, making dinners out of pasta and hope. I thought of how slowly a fracture can widen until the first person to fall through is the one who loved the floor most. After 3 days, I returned to our house to pack more of my things. Terrence was gone. His side of the closet was empty. On the nightstand lay a note in his familiar hand. "I am sorry, Bree. I will sign whatever you need. I just want you to be happy again." There were no explanations and no bargaining. The simple acceptance made me feel nothing at first but a dull ache where panic had used to live. That afternoon, Calvin texted to ask if I wanted to meet for coffee. I almost said no. Then I said yes. We chose Sanka Cafe, not far from campus, where the espresso is strong and the chairs creak when you lean back. He was quieter than he had been at the Monarch, as if grief had put a layer of gauze over his words. We talked about everything except our spouses. We spoke about work and students and childhoods full of cousins and backyard games. We compared the best jazz albums and argued gently about whether piano or saxophone carried sorrow better. We traded recommendations for the best food spots in the city and laughed at which places were worth the line and which were not. The conversation felt like stepping from a cold room into light. It did not fix anything. It did not need to. When we left, I realized I felt lighter than I had in weeks. That did not seem like betrayal. It seemed like oxygen. Over the next months, Terrence tried to reconcile. He sent bouquets that looked like they belonged at a gala and notes tucked into small packages. I stopped responding. When his messages turned desperate, I blocked his number because peace is a boundary you enforce. Ayanna left the firm quietly. She moved back to Chicago according to a colleague who mentioned it softly, as if he were telling me that rain was expected. Calvin finalized the separation with measured steps. We did not talk about their process in detail. Some facts are sharp enough even before you touch them. I focused on my work, my students, my family. The house grew quieter, and in that quiet, I filled the rooms with music I loved. Old records spun. Nina singing low, Billie Holiday's Ache, Donny Hathaway's Warmth, and their voices steadied me at night when the house creaked and the dog sighed at my feet. I cooked recipes my mother had taught me and called her when I got the seasoning just right. Calvin and I kept in touch. Sometimes we met for walks in Meridian Hill Park, where the fountain lifted and fell and children chased bubbles across the grass. Sometimes we went to the poetry open mic at Busboys and Poets and sat shoulder to shoulder as words rolled over us, brave and clear. Our conversations grew deeper and more confessional, not to rehash what had happened, but to speak about what was next. We compared scars and realized they were healing at the edges. We did not rush. We did not label anything. We let the space between us fill with trust. When I wanted to cancel plans because grief was a surprise wave that day, he said, "Then we will try again tomorrow." When he had a hard week, I left a paper bag of lemon bars on his doorstep and texted him to check after the sun went down. Care became a practice. The divorce finalized before Christmas. My lawyer was efficient, the kind of advocate who told me what I needed to know and did not drag me through what I did not. Terrence signed everything without protest. He moved to a condo in the Shaw neighborhood and threw himself into work, according to mutual friends whose voices went careful when they said his name. Occasionally our paths crossed at alumni events or gatherings for community projects. He always looked a little older, a little more tired. I felt only relief. In spring, I moved to a smaller apartment on H Street Northeast that was flooded with light. I filled it with plants that leaned toward the window, stacks of books that softened the corners of rooms, and framed photos of my parents and siblings and aunts lined up after Sunday dinner. Calvin visited often. He helped me assemble furniture that arrived with confusing diagrams and too many screws. He taught me how to make his mother's gumbo, steady as a metronome, tasting and adjusting until the pot tasted like home. One evening, after a day at the National Gallery of Art wandering rooms with landscapes and portraits that seemed to hold their own weather, we sat on my balcony with our feet up on the rail. The city lights lifted below us like a second sky. He reached for my hand. There were no declarations, only warmth and the sense that I could exhale fully in that moment. Summer brought a new rhythm: lectures, volunteer work, and lazy Sundays with a book and a bowl of fruit on the table. Calvin and I traveled to New Orleans for a festival. We danced beneath live oaks that arched like a cathedral. We ate beignets at sunrise and let powdered sugar dust our hands. We listened to brass bands slide joy into the air and did not hurry ourselves into any sentence we were not ready to finish. I found myself smiling more without catching the smile in my throat to check if it was allowed. I dreamed more and did not apologize for it. The wounds did not vanish. They stopped throbbing. Sometimes a scar ached when the weather changed, and I learned to take care of it the way you wrap a knee before a long run. A year passed. At Howard's homecoming gala, the room lifted with music, the kind that makes you reach for someone's hand before you realize your arm is already moving. Terrence approached me near the edge of the dance floor. He looked slimmer. Gray threaded his hair. "You look happy, Bree," he said quietly. I nodded. "I am." He smiled once, a small shape that did not reach his eyes. "I hope you find what you deserve," he said. "Thank you," I said. "No more and no less." I returned to my table where Calvin was laughing with my colleagues about a professor who always claimed he could predict the stock market by watching squirrels. Calvin looked up as I arrived, his smile easy. The band swelled into a song that hummed with brass. Calvin stood and held out his hand. I took it and stepped onto the dance floor. We moved the way you move when you are not trying to impress anyone, just trying to stay connected to the person in front of you. The lights threw soft circles across the floor. The room blurred at the edges the way happiness sometimes does. Later, we walked home beneath the city's golden street lamps, our steps unhurried. Calvin squeezed my hand. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked. The question was simple and enormous. I looked at him, the man who had been a stranger on the night everything bent, and felt the answer rise in me without struggle. "I do now," I said. It felt like a door opening and fresh air moving in. For the first time in years, the world felt wide open, not in a dizzying way, but in a way that made me feel steady on my feet. I did not need to know every turn to start walking. We reached my building. We climbed the stairs. Inside, the apartment held the faint scent of basil from the small plant on the windowsill. I set my keys in the dish by the door, a small domestic sound that felt like punctuation. He kissed my forehead, not as promise, but as presence. We did not map 10 years in that moment. We did not need to. We were here. In the weeks that followed, life did not become a montage. Work still demanded, students still needed recommendations at the last minute, the dog still tracked in mud, and the sink still filled with dishes if I ignored it. But the ordinary felt like a world you could live in and be loved in without performing. That was not a small thing. It was everything. Sometimes I thought of Ayanna, of how the choices she made rippled through 4 lives and beyond. I did not wish her harm. I did not wish her anything. The past is a place you visit long enough to learn the road out. Terrence and I did not become friends. We became 2 people who shared history and no longer needed to explain ourselves to each other. That was merciful. The work I did with my students took on a brightness I had missed. We planned a series on entrepreneurship in Black communities that drew more attendees than we expected, and the conversations were vivid, honest, and useful. Calvin joined one evening as a guest speaker. He stood at the podium and talked not only about code and teams, but about responsibility and the real stakes of building tools people rely on. I sat in the back row and watched students lean forward the way they do when their questions are already forming. When the evening ended, we walked out together and stood for a moment on the steps, listening to the city. A bus sighed to a stop. A bicycle bell rang. Somewhere a saxophone carried a line through an open window. I thought of the sentence that had started all of this. She always loves that view, and understood that views can change. I was no longer looking at my life through glass from across the room. I was in it, present and unafraid. I once believed the best proof of love was how well you held on when things got hard. Now I understand that part of love's work is letting go when what you are holding is hurting you. It is the quiet courage of gathering your things, asking for help, and stepping into an evening with your head up. It is the choice to build again carefully and with awareness, and to believe in the good you can make. The future did not arrive with trumpets. It came in simple shapes: 2 mugs of coffee on a table, an email from a student who finally got the internship, a recipe card smudged with rue, a Saturday afternoon spent buying a plant we promised not to kill. It came as a hand reaching for mine when the elevator jolted. It came as laughter that rose without my permission. When I think back to that first message, to my pulse thundering, to the way the restaurant's light touched polished wood, I do not flinch as I once did. I remember what followed: the truth hard and clean, the leaving deliberate and necessary, the building slow and honest. There is no virtue in staying where you are not safe. There is grace in choosing to become yourself again. 1 foot then the other. That is still how I move. I no longer measure my life by how close I can stand to harm without falling. I measure it by light and by music and by how well I sleep. When I look out my window at night, the city's lights do not feel like reminders of everything happening without me. They look like a map. And for the first time in a long time, I like where it is leading. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.